my understanding, this is the first time there's been a diagnostics panel at RESI, so great idea. A lot of excitement going on in the field. We're going to make this as dynamic between us and you as possible. We, nothing, as I said, we agreed, nothing's more uninteresting than panelists talking to each other. But we will start off that way, and then we'll open it up to the audience to make it a dynamic discussion. First, we're going to self-introduce ourselves and make it short, less than a minute each, please. And I'm Stephen Young, as we just heard, president of the Addario Lung Cancer Medical Institute, which is a nonprofit international 501c3 research consortium. We have 22 centers in the US and Europe on tissue banks, data systems. We run consortium studies within the consortium environment. The idea is reducing the energy of activation among and between academia and community, but critically with industry in the diagnostics and the therapeutic space.
Hello, my name is Bill Cadwallader, and I'm with PATH. I'm a senior commercialization officer, and what PATH is a global health organization. We are focused on really taking and developing innovative healthcare technologies through partnerships and then pushing them through in the developing world. At any time, we probably have 80 to 90 partnerships ongoing. We fund these partnerships through a combination of both public and private funding, mostly in the form of grants. We're really focused across 5 different platforms: medical device, drugs, vaccines, and diagnostics, which is interest today.
My name is Nola Masterson, and I am the managing director of Science Futures LLC. It is a 32-year-old advisory and investment firm that is specialized in biotech, from diagnostics, therapeutics, and devices and tools. And under that banner, I have probably invested in about 50 different companies and realized the exits of probably half of those.
Hi, my name is Momei Q. I'm a senior associate at Baird Capital. We are a Chicago-based venture capital firm investing in healthcare and technology firms. Me and 2 of my colleagues focus on the healthcare side, and within healthcare, we invest in diagnostics, med tech, and healthcare IT, and companies that sort of play on the intersections of all of those. So out of our companies, right now we're investing out of our 4th fund, which we just closed earlier this year. So, diagnostics has definitely been a focus of ours. The companies that we have in our portfolio now, you might be familiar with one's a tools companies, Mnemonics DX. Another one is Integrated Diagnostics and Genome DX have all been the 3 diagnostic companies that we've been involved with. So that's me.
I'm Gary Kurtzman. I'm the managing director in the healthcare group at Safeguard Scientific. Safeguard is a 6-year-old public company that it basically invests off our balance sheet in an evergreen fashion. So, we're 6 years old and still on Fund 1. The healthcare focus is really on a very relatively narrow spectrum, what we call med tech to health tech. So the med tech could be a diagnostic device or medical diagnostics, a spectrum of IT which bridges the gap between that and the care pathway. So delivery of care either to patients or delivery of information to physicians and providers to influence the care of patients. We have our most successful franchise over the last decade has been in the diagnostic spaces with exits, Clarient, Crescendo Biosciences, Addario Pharmaceuticals, and currently our portfolio consists of a really interesting diagnostic device called Trice Medical in the orthopedic space, Good Start Genetics, which is a clinical diagnostic laboratory in the pre-pregnancy genetic screening space using a sort of advanced next-gen sequencing. And we have a couple of IT companies. One is called SciApps, which is a platform for communicating diagnostic and other information to the point of care, and Medivo, which is a company which integrates diagnostic data and makes predictions based on that aggregated data. So it's a data and analytics company.
See a diverse panel, which is makes more interesting discussion. In our pre-call last week, when we were talking to each other, one of the questions that came up was, the evolving shift of diagnostics from a relatively low stakes situation to a high stakes situation now, as we're moving into the perennial discussion about when precision medicine will kick in. We all know there's not a single person in this room that doesn't agree that diagnostics is essential and fundamental to precision medicine. And that led to a discussion about who and what types of investors are investing in, particularly early stage companies, and are struck by, probably many of you in the room were as well, struck by a massive deal that was just announced with Roche purchasing a little bit more than half of Foundation Medicine for $1 billion. I mean, there's some significant money that's out there that's available to be invested in this, but as we move away, if you will, whether the classic venture capitals to the, if you will, to the venture arms or pharmaceutical companies and the range in between. There's significant dollars out there, but we thought maybe it would be interesting to start off with the question of who is actually investing in early stage companies in the diagnostic space.
Take it. I've been doing it or trying to do it for the last 10 years. And just an aside, the opportunity and the challenge, and that was Foundation Health exit yesterday. Foundation Health probably, if you ask the management team pretty well, would probably not call it a diagnostics company. They would call it a molecular information company. And the reason I think it acquired such a premium in the marketplace was not that it was doing diagnostic testing. It was trying to aggregate and sell information. And I think that's sort of a trend that we're going to see. So who invests? I think very few people are investing in the diagnostics because of the challenges. It's the same challenge in medtech in general, is that you run a race and then you're out in the marketplace and then you can't get paid. So, and that race has gotten really, really tougher in the near term. And in spite of that and all the battles that you'd have to win to get there, the exits really aren't in the $1 billion to $2 billion. So it's a very challenging space. So I think that it's not for the faint of heart. People need to know what they're getting themselves into, and I think that so I would say that it is from a standpoint of an entrepreneur starting an early stage diagnostic technology to really sort of canvas the landscape about who is interested and get them interested early, even before you might need their funding, because you're going to need that support. I know Baird, if I had to list, a group that actually has been dedicated to the space, they're certainly one of them.
I guess I can follow up on that. Since Gary mentioned us as one of the investors that do invest in diagnostics companies, so I'll just chime in a little bit on what types of companies we are investing in and why we're investing versus some of the other people. So I guess one of the things is not all diagnostic companies are created equal. So the two companies, I'll just give you an example that we have in our portfolio companies. One is GenomeDX, so they do prostate cancer screening as the platform that they start with, but their platform can really apply to all urological cancers, and with the potential of expanding to many other types of indications and diseases. So we were really looking for those platform plays that are not just one targeted disease, but can really be applied to a broad range of diseases. And the other one I want to mention is integrated diagnostics, which is a rule-out test for lung nodules. So if you think of how lung cancer is treated these days, you have these patients where their doctors take a look at them and they're definitely screwed, and you have on the other side patients that are definitely in the watchful waiting category, but you have a large population between that you can't do anything about. So this company, they have a rule-out test. Actually, they're going to have a rule-in test in the next few years too, where there's actually a treatable process following the diagnostics test. Another thing that I would mention is, the area that we are a little hesitant to go into is, say, Alzheimer's, and we hope that someday people will be able to figure out a test that can really help the patients. But for now, that is one where, you could have, a effective diagnostic test, but then what is the treatment plan after that? So when that is more unclear, those are the opportunities that investors sometimes shy away from. But with that said, I think in general, we're seeing a lot of positive trends, including what just happened with Foundation Medicine, when investors tend to see the upside that kind of counter the risk of reimbursement that people are seeing, then I think you do see both the public markets and the financings open up for these companies.
The other discussion we had, which you just touched on, Momei, was reimbursement. How can companies make money in this? What it would take for a company to, what does a company have to put in front of you to get to that stage?
People will put in, I wouldn't want to see a Me Too test, meaning I wouldn't want to see the GenomeDx test for prostate cancer is a unique test in the space for prostate cancer because it answers a unique question. But I'm not sure I'd want to see another test which will be a little bit better than PSA. So you've got to really understand how much the test improves the diagnostic and the treatment paradigm. It has to be significant. And then a good data path, a good path to generate not only the clinical and the clinical validity of the test, but the clinical utility of the test. Because in this day and age, you have to prove to the payers that the test is useful. It will change the physician's behavior and also will obviously change the patient outcome. So I'd like to say that there was a path and if you followed it in the rules, you would get there. But I think we'd like to see a well thought out path for a test which answers or provides unique return for patients and for the system.
Genomic Health started. They had to put significant resources into people that would just sit on the phone and call insurers to ask for payment for their genomic tests. And they became the advocate for the patient. And they're still doing that today, and it's 15 years later. And so this is one of the problems with reimbursement is that people don't jump on the bandwagon for a test that's going to tell you whether a certain drug is going to be good for you or bad for you, or whether you're going to have chemotherapy or you can use Avastin. But it also brings up the whole quagmire of what's happening in diagnostics this day, and that is that the life science industry is informing the diagnostic industry. So the old business model of the diagnostic industry is actually going away because it's being informed by more molecular data. And it's the analysis of that data and the information that it drives that's changing the business model of diagnostics. And we're not really sure where that's going. But that doesn't mean that the complexity won't at some point become simplified. Just like in the early days of any industrial revolution or in genomics, you have so much that you don't know what you're doing. My father was an orthopedic surgeon, and when CAT scans first came out, there was so much information compared to x-rays that he felt that he had to leave that kind of diagnostic to the next generation. And that's what's happening in the doctors that came out of medical school 30 years ago. They want to stay with their tried and true diagnostics today. So you're going to have to almost wait until a new pool of genetically trained MDs come out that actually want to use genetic information to inform their decision. But I can tell you that oncologists are very scientifically oriented, and the more data points you can give an oncologist, the more they're going to use that in the treatment of their patient. But whether you call that a diagnostic or a treatment aid is really going to decide how we talk about the business model in financial circles and what happens to the reimbursement. But it's still a conversation, and it's certainly not.
I just add one point of advice that we tend to tell our portfolio companies is to target the private payers and CMS simultaneously. The examples we've seen in our portfolio is one actually got the United coverage first, and then the other company got CMS coverage first. So since you're developing these data anyway, you should start those conversations as early as you can. And sometimes things will go wrong that you can't expect. You have one point of contact at either CMS or one of the payers, and then they move and go to another company. You have to start over. So don't wait until you have the perfect amount of data to target one versus the other. Definitely start those conversations early and be on the radar.
So from an environmental standpoint, we're seeing at least the hints that the FDA is going to start regulating, if you will, much more heavily the concept of these diagnostics. Anybody care to comment on sort of the regulatory challenges and how that impacts funding decisions from each of your organizations?
Well, we've seen what the FDA did with 23andMe when they asked for FDA clearance, and they were brave to do that because in in the personalized medicine space, the ability of the FDA to even understand what they're looking at when you show it to them is a question. But I've been in the industry long enough to know that this is a learning curve on their part. They didn't know what a monoclonal antibody was in the early 1980s. They certainly didn't know what an anti-type monoclonal antibody was or human antibody was, and so they need to get comfortable with that. So there's an educational curve there, and the FDA has reason to be concerned, because if you're going to have mobile diagnostics to tell you when you should be taking insulin if you're a diabetic and you do the wrong thing and you go into insulin shock, who's going to pay for that? And the number of diabetic patients is increasing exponentially as the population ages. So I'm not adverse to the FDA coming in, but I just think we need to have a way of educating what the data means, and make the FDA more a friendly agency as it has become in the drug development area.
I think the approach on a regulatory pathway, on a standard 510K, is becoming less interest to both healthcare providers and healthcare organizations, particularly these integrated healthcare systems. They want to be able to look at clinical evidence and measure both health impact and then health economics off of that health impact. For us, in a global health organization, we don't really deal with traditional payers, but there are certainly funders that are demanding healthcare impact of the diagnostic. In other words, do we have enough clinical evidence to show that this diagnostic can actually influence treatment decisions and improve outcomes? And even if we can show that, then is there a health economics component to that? So I think if we take that back to the United States and look at the direction of the FDA, they're looking at moving to as I understand, more and more to a PMA, where there's a clinical evidence piece of that, and that clinical evidence not only needs to show better outcomes, but also from a payer perspective, what is the health economics implication of that diagnostic tool?
At another panel we listened to earlier today, there was a discussion of how do companies get in front of you? How do they get to the investors? And what should they have with them to prove to them, prove to you, if you will, that they're a viable investment strategy?
I mean, a lot of times is you don't have to have all the pieces in place, but you have to have a plan to have everything in place. So we all know, just what we talked about, is the FDA is taking a harder look at diagnostics companies these days. You can't just get away with the CLIA model like you can before. So having thought about that strategy, even if you haven't executed on it, is really important. And again, reimbursement, the other big elephant in the room. What does your data look like? How do you plan to target CMS? What relationships do you have within the payer side of the CMS is really important. And then, as an example of one of our portfolio companies, the other aspect that we look for is a backable team. Of course, that's a common trait among all VCs, but our company, Pneumatics, is a company started by Jeff Williams out of Handy Lab. So did a really successful job at Handy Lab. So that's BD, repeated that at Accuray, and now started Pneumatics. So the fact that repeatable candidates and doing repeatable businesses, that definitely adds another layer to the story. So having diagnostic companies, the fact that we invest in it, we understand that there are risks that we can't really mitigate from day one, but having a well thought out plan to do so will get you a long way in front of compared to your other competitors.
So I teach healthcare entrepreneurship at Wharton. And, first of all, do your homework. Pretty simple. Go online, go to a website, and for instance, if I get an email from somebody that is got a therapeutics company, preclinical therapeutics company, and I don't answer their email, it shouldn't be any surprise, because my website says I don't, clearly I don't invest in that space. A little homework. I think, what Momei is saying is true, but, it's like everything else. You got to have a good elevator pitch. You got to get, in front and, capture my attention for at least, 5 minutes so that that you can engage me in a conversation. That's sort of step one. And step two is listen. So, and so if you start hearing resistance or, hey, well, what about this? Don't try to argue. Sort of try to listen. So, it's really just, I think, by and large, it's it's getting in front of the right people, and you got to, so don't, think that Andreessen Horowitz is going to back an early stage diagnostics company unless there's a huge tech component to it, and so it's pretty simple, just like anything else.
And Steve, I'd add to that. For us, it's not all about the right team, et cetera. It's really about getting in front of us and being aligned with our mission. I think not only PATH, but there's a number of organizations that are really mission focused, mission oriented, and so if I'd certainly agree with Gary. If you can come in there and first off, the diagnostic aligns with our mission, and our mission is very specialized. I mean, we are in global health. We're very specific of what we need. We are in the low margin, high volume areas, probably the opposite of what they teach in Wharton of what is attractive. But there are certain things that we want, and if you achieve them, including some clinical evidence that the diagnostic has a value proposition above and beyond what is used on the market today, then there's a likelihood that for sure we're going to be engaged with you, and can we take it to the next step? That is of interest to us.
Again, in an earlier session, during the Biotech Family Offices panel, there was a discussion about what the companies should present to the potential investors. Should they come in with a confidential package or a non-confidential package? And the uniform answer across the stage was, do not try to attempt to tie down the investors with confidentiality agreements. So that's, to be practical, what should they come to you? Should they be wide open with the companies? What's the risk to them to be completely open and honest on what their fundamentals are underneath their technologies?
Nobody in the investment industry is interested in stealing your idea and then doing it. If they were, they wouldn't be in the investment industry. They'd be entrepreneurs doing companies. So sometimes the entrepreneur worries about, do you have a company in your portfolio that might be competitive to me? But once again, going back to Gary, if you do your homework and you see who they've invested in, you will know if they have a company in their portfolio and they're just looking to you for competitive data, and then they would probably be the last people you would talk to about it. But whenever you talk to a venture capitalist or a source of money that might be inside Cardinal Health or Novartis or Pfizer, you really want to be talking to them with something exciting that they couldn't do in-house, that they want to sell later on, that you'd be a potential buyer for them, or if you're a venture capitalist, you could sell them to the next larger fish in the pond. And so the economic interests of the investor has to be in line with the entrepreneur. So on every slide, where's the money for the investor? It's not just, we're not here for a science lecture, and we're not here to be updated on what's going on in science. We're here to see where is science meeting an investment need and a market need that if I invested in this company, I can make money.
When you speak of elevator speeches that you want to be presented with, that's going to be short, sweet, and to the point. What type of information will capture your attention for further dialogue?
So I think you need to do, if you do your homework and say, sort of introduce it in a way that's at least compelling. You know, basically, it's been relevant maybe to what I've done in the past or what but I just think it's a really clear, concise, you know, minute or two, or you know, it's an email that you can craft, which doesn't take an hour to read through. That says this is you know, this is what I'm doing. This is why, you know, it's special or unique or, you know, differentiated. And this is what I think I need to succeed. And then and it's really just a matter, you know, what you really want to do is grab my attention long enough that you can go into it longer. I think a very important thing, and I think is not to blast investors, because you'll feel frustrated when you've sent 100 email back and got one return. Just do your homework, be selective, figure out who might be interested or who, you know, has an interest, and actually might know something. So if you have a new breast cancer therapeutic, for example, and there's a fund that invests, you know, in oncology, you know, maybe they do therapeutics and diagnostics, they're likely to understand what you're talking about. So, you know, and you know, personalize it a little bit. I think that helps a lot too.
I'm going to steal a line from what another VC said at another talk. But essentially what this investor said about every elevator pitch is just, you have to communicate if there is a large unmet need, are there customers, and can you find those customers? And that's all you need to do in the initial elevator pitch. And the investors, if you've been in investor meetings, who probably have either positive or negative experience about this, they'll always jump in with questions. And, you know, along the way as you tell your story, so what you need to do in the initial elevator pitch is basically portray the idea that this is somewhere that a space that they want to be in, and then you sort of have either the relationships with expertise or the strategy to get there. And the conversation will naturally flow from there if you capture the initial conversation with those 3 points.
How do you feel about biomarkers related to new drugs? Kind of getting into diagnostic that way. I'm not sure where pharma is. I mean, I'm hearing such conflicting information from them. But some are on it, and some are thinking about it. We know it's coming, but that seems like a wave that's building again.
Yeah. So one of the.
Or am I off base?
No, I think the company that I invested in, that I probably think was the single best diagnostic company that I've seen.
Yeah.
It's a company called Crescendo Biosciences, and what that was is a series of 12 biomarkers which was able to predict disease activity in patients with rheumatoid arthritis.
Yep.
And it was able to tell which patients were actually had active disease, because it's hard to do clinically. It was able to tell which patients responded to therapy or were responding to therapy, so that you could make the decision to keep them on therapy or switch them earlier rather than later. I actually think, and it's a $9 billion drug spend.
Yep.
I think it was the I think the, you know, it had such tremendous potential because of its tie and to a, you know, potentially toxic class of drugs. And I think one of my biggest disappointment, or biggest thrills and disappointments, we sold it for a fair amount of money, but we sold it and we didn't get to see it play out, because I don't think the large company who acquired it will actually, you know, really, it'll realize its potential, but not that potential. So I think that in the right situation, I think it's a tremendous, it's the thing I would be looking for if I were. You tie it to a therapeutic decision. I think GenomeDX is another great company because it is tied to a therapeutic decision, maybe not a drug, but it is tied to a therapeutic decision.
Back on your question, diagnostics are getting obviously tied closer and closer to drugs as we move forward. And we saw an interesting study called LungMap, the Lung Master Protocol, which was, if you will, FDA instituted, implemented, if you will, or driven, where the common problem is every company is developing their own diagnostics in-house. And so, for example, checkpoint inhibitor in immuno-oncology, every company is going to have their own drug. So if a company fails drug A from company A, they literally have to go through an entirely new testing paradigm. Does that sort of an environmental status, does that impact funding decisions, investing decisions at your level? Meaning the trends where we're going the next 4 or 5 years looking out. As the regulatory science has changed, as the diagnostics are being tied closer to drugs, what does that mean to you as investors?
I think it's information. I mean, again, unless you have a proprietary set of biomarkers, if you're looking at, for instance, a gene mutation that's driving that, anybody's going to be able to find that mutation, right? It's just how that information is applied to the care or the management of that patient. So I wouldn't, I think it's an area of a lot of fruitful, I mean, I'm interested in that space, and it's all going to happen, but how it happens, are you developing the diagnostic, are you developing the therapeutic with the notion that that therapeutic is tied to a particular mutation or set of mutations? And then maybe it's not the mutation, but it's actually something else in the patient's genomic mix that does that. So we're going to figure that out.
I mean, pharma's interest in the space in general is positive from an investor perspective. I mean, it's, they're definitely a very important strategic acquisition set for people investing in diagnostic companies. So back to our conversation earlier about fundraising challenges from diagnostic companies today compared to the traditional biotech companies. I mean, this is definitely a pathway that's opening up now. And whether or not we see biotech exits, that who knows, but this is definitely a step in the positive direction.
Just one question. I mean, listening to the tenor of this conversation, it's always about the diagnostic guy versus the drug guy. As two separate things. I mean, will they ever merge as you drive for efficacy of the therapeutics into, they're being developed, on the same group, and it's not two separate things.
I think in general, the pharmaceutical companies have not wanted to have, they wanted to be ubiquitous, the testing. So, so we saw that with Crescendo. Roche bought, almost bought Foundation, but I think they want the information for their own purposes. So I think that, and we actually have a digital diagnostic company for respiratory disease, and it looks like all the pharma want everybody to be able to have that, and they don't want to have it. They don't want it to be proprietary. They want everybody to have it because they think the more people get tested, the more people will use their drugs. So, and if they have the best drug, they'll win. And so, I don't think that I see a trend to the pharma wanting to own the diagnostic. I mean, the classical was Genentech or the HER2 new, and they made that testing ubiquitous, even though they owned it.
Because the pharmaceutical companies are kind of, they're a little bit lost because the blockbuster model is gone. And that was how they increased their value, was with a blockbuster drug. The more and more personalized medicine diagnostics that come along, the more and more you can tweak your drug use, and the more and more people will find that they can't use certain drugs, but they can use other drugs. And so will the two come together? Maybe if big data sets allow the patient to make the decision, they will come together, but it won't be driven by pharma.
The patient or the doctor?
It'll probably be the patient asking the doctor to test for biomarkers. And biomarkers, as you asked earlier, are a moving target because they don't always diagnose anything.
Right.
They don't always necessarily mean that because you have a biomarker that the epitope is being utilized by protein pathways. So it doesn't really say that you have anything, it just says you have a biomarker. And so the proof is then on the diagnostic company to make that biomarker mean something by going back and get patient data of ill patients and making it correlate with the doctor. And that's why there's so much cost in developing a biomarker database, and why investors are shying away from it, because it's not just finding the biomarker, but it's then making sure that that biomarker links to a disease that can be then acknowledged by the doctor that links to a disease, and then is accepted by the doctor as a modality of treatment. And those are three different things you have to do.
So we are out of time. So if you can join me in thanking the panel.